So I'll introduce here the first issue of Fashion New Order. It was called Celebratory Issue. I think it contrasted a lot with the environment we were living with the pandemic and that of fascism, both in culture, Facebook, canceling people, different opinions, everything taken to extremes. Actually, the logo was supposed to be called Dictatorship of Shit and Freedom, and I ended up sobering it up a bit. So he went for Dictatorship of Love and Freedom. We had an article on the best designers of 2020, an interview with Michelle Lamy, and an article of Tom Vanderboord. That's the designer who designed the photo in the cover. So we also had some paid ads, and here I call myself L'Editeur X, which is Editor X. So to maintain an idea of not personalization, because the concept of the magazine is so personal, I want to show the opposite in the name. I don't want to show my name. I want to be really anonymous and mysterious in a way. So here for the anti-class of 2020, it was actually an interesting concept. The first original idea was to portray an American graduation photo album with the photo of each designer in a caption. But we ended up changing to the designer's work because I thought it would make more sense. And we took off the caption, but we maintained this aesthetic actually of a kind of gothic graduation album, but it's still based on a graduation album. And I thought it was interesting. I left an element of redemption, this golden arrow that I always like to live. To hear some of the designers that we disclosed, Wei Yu is really interesting, and she talks about fat phobia, for example, in this look, which is a topic that may not be as in focus in Europe, but in America is really relevant. A couple more designers, and here's Vitor Shibata. He's actually a designer I personally found. I went to his school events, Instituto Europeu de Design in Brazil, in São Paulo. So I went there, I checked like all the students' work, and his work really stood out. He made these accessories out of melon protein, and I sourced him, I found him, I took a couple of pictures, and then I went to discuss an article with our journalist. All articles were revised by me, by the way. Wei Run is also really interesting. She designs based on a different point of view from animals, like how snakes see reality, how flies see reality. For example, like also from medical exams, how does a PET scan look like in the body, and then she designs from it. It's really interesting fun. Andrea Grossi is probably my personal favorite, and I think it's also the strongest designer. What I thought it was really interesting is how he subverts this Catholic idea of the Pope hat, but also the big dress worn by women in courts. That's fairly criticized by feminism for not giving its freedom, but I think it fails to see how men quite enjoy being a peacock and it has its advantages. So I thought it was interesting that he used in a man. What was also really interesting about it was that he puts like Hitler and McDonald in his mood board, which we in his portfolio also. Then we also asked for him for those pictures, and we use here in the background. It's a really strong image, but in the same point, I didn't want to censor it in a way that it would offend someone, but I also didn't want it to be like completely opaque as it was like something too aggressive. I think this kind of transparent backgrounds was a really interesting result. It shows that it's there in our history. It's not taken to the trash, but it's also not alive. Then we had a couple more designers, Jess and Aline, and Young Ho was one that I wrote personally. I thought it was really interesting. His work, it talks about like the Clockwork Orange. It shows like all the aggressiveness and all the violence that's supposed to show, I think, during this period. But it also has a redemption point because, for example, the guns are made out of balloons, resembles to me a lot of toy soldiers, which I think is really interesting. Anya Elizar also, I saw her work, I made her analysis, and then I went to talk to her. Like, her work reminded me a lot of Lords of Chaos, which is a movie about a heavy metal band, which was really interesting, especially the makeup and the outfits that I watched during a week before. Then Tom Vanderboort, he it was also something really interesting is that he had an interpretation of his own work, but I actually had another. To me, it really looked as an explosion of emotions with all the spikes coming out of him, coming out of the model. And in his short film, it also shows that. And it's also interesting how he developed it into a more wearable piece that could perhaps be commerciable. Yeah. And then we had Masquerade Ball that was like, I feel like it's a very professional editorial and made mostly from emerging designers and artists. I love this glove look. So it was really interesting. This photograph, how it shows like a priest. Also, for for this text, I wrote it myself. It talks about the different generations from the last century. For example, baby boomer, Generation Z, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Alpha. That's the ones being born now. But what I liked about it is that I portray it like it's a battle, like it's a social battle for the hegemonic cultural power in society. I play like it's a dispute between generations, one coming on top, not the other. They knock one out. Chaosha was also very nice work that we received from this duo, and I edited the text a bit. Michelle Lamy, I hosted the interview with her, very interesting person. Also for Four Nights of the Apocalypse, I directed and photographed. I mainly used clothes from my house, from my home. I have some that I designed, the other that I produced for myself. And it's about the elements of apocalypse that's happening in our world. It was also here, it's interesting in this look that I used my mother's prom dress. It looked really nice with a jacket I made myself and a shirt from Loewe. And yeah, that's it. I really like the idea of power and moving around, almost like it's running away. I think that's the main concept of the first issue. Hope you liked it. Thank you.